right. So welcome everybody to the monthly Peaceful Productivity session. I'm Anne Rajoo, the host, and I've got the wonderful Amanda Browne with me. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, nice to see you.
I'm so excited. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know it's going to be really cool, and I love it for many different reasons. But first of all, I love what you do because you are a leadership coach, I would say. You bring, sustainable leadership to workplaces, and you really look into the workplace culture and well-being and how we can prevent burnout and all of that good stuff, which I think is so needed and so important. And I love that you've got this quite corporate background and you still seem to work a lot in corporate. Whereas I'm really like now into like the people I work with, they're usually solo entrepreneurs, but I think there is still some good stuff that we can take from corporate and potentially apply it to individual companies and businesses and entrepreneurs and freelancers or whatever it is. So I'm really excited for that conversation because sometimes it can feel really hard to come up with these concepts and cultures and applications when you're not working in a company, when you don't have a team who tells you this is our culture and this is our well-being program. So I really love that. But I'm also very curious because I read in your bio, because I know you're quite creative, just like me, that you're a bilingual poet. So tell me more about that before we get into the productivity stuff.
Yeah, I have a small collection of like a poetry book that I published a couple years ago. So half of the poems are in English and half of them are in Spanish. So I'm fluent in Spanish. I spent a lot of time in Central America. And so I like to write. And so poetry and writing is one of my sort of creative passions and hobbies. And a few years ago, I was just a machine and like churning out all of these different poems, and they needed to be shared. So yeah.
I love that. That's so cool. Yeah, poetry is not really, I don't think that's really in me. I love writing too.
Yeah.
Definitely, but more, just story writing, poetry, not so much. But I love it. That's so cool that you've got a poetry book.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe if you want to tell us a little bit more about the, more professional side of things.
Yeah.
So what we do, and then we can get into, the topics that we wanted to discuss and really see how we can bring together the peaceful productivity and the sustainable leadership piece and just have a chat together.
Yeah, awesome. Love to. So hi, everyone. My name is Amanda. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I also have my master's in public health. And so for those of you who don't live in the US, for clinical social work, what that means is it's really sort of looking at mental health and doing sort of mental health therapy and interventions. What I do in my business, though, is more mental skills coaching for purpose-driven leaders. And so I work with leaders who are, sort of either bleeding hearts like myself or working in more service-oriented roles or companies that provide services to clients, and really working through, how do we address some of the stories that speaking of story, right? Some of the stories that we tell ourselves, or some of the habits or patterns that we are ascribing to that lead to or contribute to burnout, and how that influences culture. Because oftentimes, when it comes to, like, as Anne was talking about, more sort of corporate or organizational culture, leadership is the biggest influence on that, because everybody's looking to the leadership in terms of what they can and cannot get away with, what they can and cannot do, what's acceptable, and what gets promoted or what gets rewarded within the company or within the organization. And so that also kind of translates to smaller company. In that way, it does translate to smaller companies. So we can get into that. But yeah, I've done a lot of work with behavioral health providers or mental health providers in New Mexico. And then in a previous life, I did more sort of international violence prevention work in Central America, Colombia, Cameroon, and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That sounds really adventurous.
Yes. I've been joking with people that I fell in love. There's a style of book called Choose Your Own Adventure from my childhood. You would reach a certain point and it would say, if you want to choose this, go to page 67. If you choose this, go to page like 53. And it would have a different kind of outcomes to kind of like experience the story in a different way. So I decided, I've been joking with people that I fell in love with those books when I was little. And so now I decided to become the living embodiment of a choose your own adventure book. So it's been a very windy path. I've lived many lives.
Oh, wow. Cool. Well, this might be a conversation for another time. I think you have a lot of real cool adventurous stories inside you. I can tell. But let's focus on what we have at hand today. So yeah, we want to talk about peaceful productivity and sustainable leadership. And I mean, we chatted before, and I think there's a lot of alignment. And I think the word sustainable is really important because that's where I think the peaceful productivity fits in, because a business isn't very sustainable if we are, yes, productive, but in the process, we burn out. And we all know there is that burnout pandemic and all of that. Like, it's just a big topic that is going, that's affecting so many people, big companies, small companies, very successful entrepreneurs, maybe people who are just starting out, mothers, carers, whoever. Like, everyone seems to be just really exhausted and tired. And either in burnout or very close. So what are kind of like practical things that you think, what would be worth talking about in that context?
Yeah, I think, and this came up in one of our previous conversations, but I really think manufactured urgency is a huge part of what drives us into the ground, especially if we are leaders or owners of our own business. I think many of us have had the experience where people are coming to you and everything feels like an emergency or is like urgent, or is like people are acting like they're in crisis. And it can get really easy to get caught up in that sort of current of everything is crisis, everything is urgent. And depending on where you're at in terms of like how responsible you feel or how much responsibility you hold within a given business or enterprise, that can feel really true. And what ends up happening is you get into this mindset of, I have to do all these things and it has to happen now, because if it doesn't, like, you become sort of, I don't know if like everyone's familiar with the sort of story or the fable of Chicken Little, where he's running around saying the sky is falling, but the sky isn't falling. It's just because an acorn fell on its head, right? Like, like it's that kind of sort of skewed perspective or perception. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important, especially as a leader, to make sure that you're taking those times to really check in with yourself. And like, is this something that's actually urgent? Especially if you're like feeling tired, if you've already reached that point where you're feeling tired or you're feeling overwhelmed, or you feel like all you're ever doing is running and like racing from one thing to the next. It really is important to look at what is actually urgent. What are the things that actually need to get done right now? What are the things that actually need to get done this week or this month? And what are things that maybe you really, really, really want them to get done, but if they don't get done, it's not going to be the end of the world. The sky isn't going to fall. Like, your business isn't going to go under. Like, it might not be ideal, but it's not going to be the end, right? It's not going to be a tragedy. So I think there's that kind of, we can get into these really sort of catastrophizing or extreme, perceptions or like beliefs that and stories that we tell ourselves. And part of that is there's that it's also the concept of physics, right? Like, an object in motion stays in motion. And so there's that element of like, you start building this momentum of urgency or crisis, And maybe that works for you for a little while, or maybe that was needed for a little while,
Yeah.
but then like suddenly you can't stop.
Normality.
Exactly.
Yeah. The hamster wheel. I keep thinking about the hamster wheel. It's just in front of my like visual eye. Like, you can't get off.
Exactly. And that's part of why it can be like, it's simple, but it's hard sometimes because you have this momentum or you're on a hamster wheel, and like jumping off or like suddenly stopping can feel really jarring, right? Like it feels like, oh, like this doesn't feel right.
Exactly.
Like, or is this, I don't know, this feels like I'm, taking this big leap, right? Or I'm jumping off of a train, like this moving train or this moving object. But the reality, like sometimes the reality is that's what you need to do to slow down. And it's actually, like it's fine. It's just pumping the brakes, and you'll be fine. You'll be okay.
Exactly.
And you need it. You need that break, because suddenly once you stop, you realize like this is also the challenge in burnout cycles that I often see, where people have been running and running and running. And as soon as they find, and like they're fine, they're kind of like surviving in that area. As soon as they stop, suddenly they're sick. Suddenly they have these like flare-ups.
Exactly. I mean, everyone probably had that. Like this holiday sick, like you anticipate your holiday, your vacation, you're taking time off, you're gonna relax, and you get sick. It so often happens. It's just it's that. Like you keep going, you don't realize, and then
exactly. And I think, and this is, the takeaway that I hope people start to recognize when that happens is the reason your body is getting sick as soon as you rest is because you've been pushing it too hard and you haven't been allowing it to actually rest and recover in a way that's sustainable and manageable over time, right? And so that's why, like, when you take a break that is supposed to be for fun and like rejuvenating your spirit and your energy, like that's kind of what it is when you get sick, is your body is like, okay, we're going to do this by going into hibernation mode, or by making us like lay down and be bedridden for the next week because you haven't actually been sleeping, or you haven't been, nourishing us the way that we need to be nourished, or like we have all of these germs, or like we have all these infections that we've been trying to fight, or this inflammation that we've been trying to fight. And we haven't had the break that we need to actually do that. And so making sure, this is part of why making sure that as you're examining and reflecting on how you're structuring your business and your days and how you're managing your time, like rest is critically important. You need to protect that time, because otherwise your physical health is going to suffer, which then will lead into all of the other aspects of life. And if you're not able to actually enjoy the time that you have when you're not working, what are you doing it for? Right? So that's sort of like the big question, right? And it can be overwhelming, but it's important.
Yeah, but it's exactly really what brought me to the peaceful productivity, because that was me. So me on the hamster wheel, having a chronic inflammation, not having enough sleep and rest was definitely not on my priority list. Very much like in the urgency, do, long to-do lists, very few hours that I'm working. I have to get it all done. Until the point where it just knocked me out. I was losing my hair because the stress had also impacted my hormones. Not eating well, not sleeping well, chronic inflammation. I was like, oh, okay, that's not going too well here, not sustainable. And that's when I really looked, like started to strip it back and be like, okay, what's going on here? So there's quite a few of beliefs that you already kind of like touched, that you work with that. I discovered there are a few beliefs that are like, I've got to be productive so that I show my value in this world. And if I'm resting, I am lazy, and that kind of thing. And then also I was doing a lot of busy work, all that urgency and then like all that, like it needs to get done. But then what you said, if you strip it back and you really look at the task that you're doing and you really take a minute to pause and think, is that really as important as I believe it is right now? Or is that maybe for another day? Or is that maybe something that I don't need to do at all because it really doesn't matter? Yeah. And these kind of things, like exactly that's when I started to realize that needs to shift. And that's what I work with clients now, is to really look at what are the essential things, what are the things that move the needle, what are the nice to have things, and where do we build in the rest and the fun and the creativity into this whole equation, and how do we find that rhythm that works for you? So yeah, I mean, from your side, what is maybe like a practical tip that you can give to determine what's really the task I should be doing?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, there's sort of two elements. One is like the keeping in mind, like it's a marathon, especially if you are a business owner, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like overnight successes come from like 3 to 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears of not being recognized, right? Like that kind of thing. So like so like maybe not for everybody. Some people get lucky or like do just fine without that. But like, recognizing that, like being really clear about what are you doing this for? Like how are you spending your time? Why is dedicating your time to this business or this role or this task or this job so important for you in the bigger picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like figuring out what your motivation is going to be really key, because the other thing, what that will help you do is ground into and focus on you and your business and what you need, and let go of like this company is doing, like the sort of comparison and sort of rat race kind of competition where you feel like you have to beat other people to the punch, or you feel like you're not moving fast enough, or you're not succeeding fast enough compared to the other people around you. And there's an element of like, it's that finding that balance of, you need to know your competition, you need to know what other people are doing. It's helpful, it's important to be aware of, but that shouldn't be what motivates you necessarily. That shouldn't be your primary motivator, right? Like that should be helpful information, it should be additive. But when it comes to how you're prioritizing your time and what is important for your business, it's really getting clear on, why are you doing it? What are your values as a business owner and as a person? And how can you structure your time and your operations to align with that? So like, for example, I'm somebody who really I value creativity. And so, and I know what I need to be creative, which is I need to have a flexible schedule. I also know that I need to have enough autonomy in the tasks that I do, because the way that I operate or the way that I complete things, I can, as long as I have a clear deadline, but I have like enough flexibility in my day where it's not like I have to work on this an hour every day if I don't want to. I can usually crank those projects out in a couple of hours, maybe 2 days within that 2-week period. But having that grace of like, I have this time to be creative, I have this time to let my brain and my system really like hone in, or like get rid of whatever extra stuff and like unleash that energy in a different way, so that I can then sort of sit down and focus on this particular task. I know it'll get done. I know it'll get done on time. And I have that flexibility and that freedom to be creative, because I'm not overloading myself with obligations and responsibilities or meetings or things like that. So that's one example of how, my values and my needs as a person, I guess, in terms of how I work, how I structure my time and my schedules around my deliverables, right? And there are some weeks where, I'll still have that deadline, but I will have like a handful of meetings or obligations. But the way that I tend to plan is I know I need buffer time, because if I don't have that buffer time, I get really overwhelmed. I start to shut down, and then I don't feel like I produce, in my view, I don't produce as good of a product. Usually it's still like, even like my like B or C level project is usually like at least an A- or a B+ for most people, right? So like it's one of those, it's not really that bad in my view, but again, like knowing myself and how I work. And so for anybody who's a business owner, it's similar. Like, how do you work? How do you what are the things that tell you or that help you feel comfortable and confident in what you're doing and how you're doing it? And then thinking through, so what do you need? Like what kind of environment do you need to be in to be your most productive self? What kind of like routine or structure do you need to be able to complete the tasks or deliverables that you have? What are the tasks or deliverables that you hate doing and you always procrastinate, right? And so when you think through both what your strengths are, the things that you tend to avoid or procrastinate, and then generally what your values and your priorities are, both as a person and as a business owner, that gives you the full map to then figure, like, that sort of like the overview or the big picture. And then you kind of take those and break those down into, okay, how much time do I like need to set aside for these different things? How can I give myself the space? How can I create this kind of environment that is going to allow me to thrive in what I do, rather than I'm trying to survive within a context that was predetermined for me and I don't get to choose. Now, if you find yourself in that position, there's other ways to navigate that. But if you're a business owner, if you have more control over how you're managing or structuring your business and your time, like that's sort of like who I'm speaking to in this moment, where like you really do have that full license to say, like, you know, fuck all the rules or fuck the system. Like, I'm going to do it I'm going to structure myself how I want or need to. And it's going to work for me, because you get to do what you want if you're your own boss.
Exactly. Yeah, and that brings me to something that we chatted before as well. Is this whole, like life is not always the same, and we have these like seasons and phases and all of that. Like for me, it's always this example for, as a mother, my children are getting bigger now. Motherhood looks a little bit different. I have structure, but it's not as structured maybe as when they were little, when every few hours they needed feeding and this and that and this and that. Like, it's just, like now my day starts different. Just at the beginning of this year, they both went to the same school, so I didn't have to do any drop-off anymore. My husband is doing all the drop-off. That gave me an extra hour in the morning. So that really needed some adjustment of like, so how do I start my day? And really for me in that moment, I was very intentional about like, I don't want to just take that hour and fill it with work, which I can very easily because I've got plenty of things to do. I could go straight to the desk and start my work and get more things done. But when I saw this opportunity, I have an extra hour, I really was like, no, you're going to take half an hour of extra work time because the business needs it. But the other half an hour is for you, and you do whatever you want to do with that. And quite often now I actually do some creative projects in the morning. Like right now we're doing this whole home renovation project. I've been painting my furniture there. I've been, upgrading here and there. And like, I'll do that in the morning. And that's exactly like this flexibility. But also for me, I know like you, creativity fuels me. So it gives me energy. Even though I'm still doing something, it never takes any energy away. It always fills me. And I really feel like if I do it early morning, I just have so much better energy for my day. So I think it's quite important, like what you said, to understand, how do you work? What works for you? How does it look like for you right now? And maybe there's going to be a change in season. Maybe something that used to work is not working so well anymore because, things change in life. But also, I always encourage my clients to be playful and to try out things, like just see, like this creativity thing. I was like, oh, I don't know if I will be really in the morning, will be sparked with creativity. Maybe I do it later in the day. But if I want to do it later, I realize I often don't get to it because there's then something else that needs to be done. So if I really start that in the morning, I realize that's when I really go and do it. So it's all these little like discoveries and playing around with your day and feeling this could feel good, or maybe that feels better. Some people might want to have a nap. I can't nap in the day. So it's like this, everyone is very different. So
exactly.
playing around and seeing what works.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, and I love incorporating play. And you can do it in different ways. And I think again, it's giving yourself that permission of like, okay, what I've been doing isn't working, or I've been really stressful. So I'm gonna, for the next 3 weeks, or for the next month, or for the next 3 months, like I'm gonna give myself permission to, to do what I want, or to work on this project, or to give more time to this thing that maybe isn't, like income generating, or maybe isn't, new business development, or whatever the case might be. And like seeing how that feels and using that as an experiment, and sort of after whatever time frame you give yourself to play, then you can check in and see like, is this working for me? Like, because sometimes you'll surprise yourself and you'll suddenly realize, oh, I was pushing myself really hard to perform, or to do, or to create something, or to get this task done, or to do more. And I actually ended up being more productive by not doing that, right? And like by having this experiment. And so, like giving yourself that freedom. And, for me recently, I had, a situation where I was like trying to be really consistent with generating content and sort of getting myself out there and doing all of these things. And I was, trying to be really consistent with that, but doing, a lot, trying to get as much done on a weekly basis as possible. And I ran into a period where I was just sort of felt like creatively blocked, and it was becoming harder to kind of think of what to do or what to produce. And so I was like, I'm going to take 2 weeks and I'm not going to think about it. And I'm just going to focus on the business that I already have, the work and the clients that I already have, and give myself a break from trying to create or promote or like do things for the next 2 weeks and see what happens. And maybe I'll be refreshed. And what I learned was after that 2 weeks, I was like, I actually don't care about half of the stuff that I was talking. Like, I don't care. Like, I was like, oh, what that told me was, when I realized, I was like, oh, I actually am not invested in this. That was telling me that I was being driven or motivated by this, like an idea, like what I thought I was supposed to be doing, right? Like not what I wanted to do, not what made sense for my strengths and my needs, or not something that felt like, a business or a service that I fully believed in, right? Or that I was fully really bought into. And so it was like, okay, that means I need to pivot, or the way that I'm going to approach this is going to look a little different. And I'm going to give myself the time to figure that out, because, like when it comes to business and sales and conversions, what I have learned, because I used to be a fake it till you make it kind of person, you cannot fake it till you make it, because people can tell that you don't believe what you're selling. Like you don't believe in what you're promoting, right? So for me at least, like giving myself this space to really come to, a new strategy, and to really think through, how do I act? Like, what is it that I'm like the sort of the mission or the purpose or my goal of, creating a better world, right? And helping people live like happier, more fulfilling lives. That's the ultimate sort of vision or mission. How my approach to doing that needed to shift. So giving myself this space to really think through what is the actual delivery method and pathway to that feels more sustainable and more alive for me. And like that's where I'm going to find more success, or that's how I need to pivot and recognize that what I was doing wasn't working because I didn't really believe in it, and it really wasn't me. Like it wasn't authentic to how I show up, right?
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that example. I think for me, what comes to my mind is that quite often when we feel like something is not working, we're getting stuck on like, something is not working, I need to find a solution for that thing. For example, in your social media experience, that could have been produce more content, look at more other people, what are they doing, and bringing that in and trying to replicate that. But instead, what you did, and what I think is always very smart, is to look at what works, or what works for me, and what do I like. So for example, as well, like if you take that for me with the creativity, I know the creativity fuels me. So rather than trying to solve how do I make my day more productive, or how do I create more output and whatever? I'm like, no, how can I bring in more of the creativity? Because I know that shifts something for me, that makes me feel good. And when I feel good, I produce better things, faster, better, at ease, and I have more ideas that are maybe not creative in that creator sense, but creative in the business sense. And I think this is often where we get stuck with, like, there is a problem and we're trying to fix it and we're trying to work harder because that's what culture has told us. But quite often the point actually is to let go of that thing, whatever is not working, and try something completely unrelated. And you will see often the problem actually resolves by itself, which is crazy. But we don't often do that because that's not what people tell us. They're like, create more content, be more consistent, show up, do this. And the outcome is not necessarily what we could create by just stepping away. Yeah.
I think this is where I really like, like farming and gardening metaphors, where like if you ever speak to somebody who works on a farm or sort of, or has a really thriving garden, like it takes work and it takes consistent effort and it takes understanding and knowing like a certain level of awareness of when and how to do something for it to yield the best outcome for the plant and for what you're producing. But there's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of downtime too. Like you plant the seed, you need to make sure that it's fertilized and watered consistently. But that's not always, like sometimes maybe it's every day for the first like month, and then it tapers off, and then you're really just waiting for it to sprout. And so there's a lot, like when we're like, there's a level of understanding that whatever we create, whether it's like our business, whether it's something in our life, whether it's our relationships, it's its own living thing, just like a plant is its own living thing and is going to take on a life of its own. And so there's things that it will do on its own, or there's things that like it sort of just need time for it to kind of come forward. And as much as you as the farmer, as the person who's tending to this thing, really wants the fruit of whatever that might be, the reality is it has its own growth cycle, and that fruit it's not gonna come any faster if you do more, right? It's not going to produce.
It dies.
Exactly. Yeah. If you do too much, you're going to kill it. And so it's like what I think, Anne, you and I are talking about is, as in terms of rhythm and balance and cycles, is sort of understanding what that looks like. And so again, thinking about your business as a growing cycle, and if it's a plant or a seed, or if one service even is a plant or a seed within your whole range of services, if you're somebody who provides has a more sort of robust offering, then like understanding that maybe in the beginning, it's going to take more time and effort. Like you're going to be sort of putting a lot more energy into it to make sure everything is set up, that it has everything it needs. And then there's sort of stepping back, and that stepping back isn't because it's finally taking off and doing everything that you wanted to do. That stepping back is, okay, now I've laid out the groundwork. I've created the right environment for this to nurture. Now I got to kind of let it do its thing. And so this, I think, when it comes to social media or marketing, part of that is I might put some effort into really thinking about what my branding and messaging needs to be and what my brand voice is. And then I'm going to create some content or some copy that reflects that. But then I just put it out there, and it's going to do what it's going to do. And maybe I get really good engagement in the beginning. Maybe I don't, right? Maybe the post that I posted 6 months ago doesn't actually get traction, like it doesn't until now, right? Like maybe it takes 6 months for this one post to finally take off. That's not exactly how social media works, depending on the platform, but but it is that kind of thing of, figuring out what that right balance and cycle is for like not doing too much and understanding that some things need time and space. And while you're giving that plant or that thing that you've created the time and space to sort of get settled and start sprouting and start sort of like developing, you're allowed to, that's why you can have that leisure time, you know, whether that's, you know, in the farm, it would be like other chores around the farm, or like, you know, a lot of downtime, like reading or writing or whatever. And, you know, so that could be the other aspects of your life that need attention, that you can give that attention to, that's not your business, that's not the thing that you've already watered, you've already fertilized. There's nothing more that you can do than what you've already done. And you just got to let it grow. You just got to let it do its thing, let nature take its course.
Yeah. What comes to mind there are conversations with friends and fellow entrepreneurs and all. It's this whole thing that there's so much distraction these days. There's so much out there that we're like, oh, okay, now I've done this. I've done my fertilizing and all of that, and it's growing. But there's this other idea, and there's this other thing, and I've seen X do Y and Z do A, and I think it's definitely requires quite a bit of intentionality from you as a business owner to say, no, listen, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm focusing on. And all these other things, they are nice. And I mean, I've got like lists of like project ideas and things that I want to do one, but they are there and they're for one day, but not right now. And it brings back to what we started this whole conversation with, like this, what is really important and urgent, and what are the other things that are the shiny objects and the cool ideas and the things that we want to do. But also it brings me to something that you mentioned the other day when we were speaking the other community, I think that was quite interesting when you mentioned that you were consuming a lot of content that was actually for a different phase for your business. Like you explained it just now, but like we're looking at things that are interesting and they can probably really be good for your business, but not right now, because right now you might be in a very different phase of your business. So maybe you want to speak to that. I found that very interesting the other day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, in the first year of my business, a lot of the content that I didn't realize this at the time. Like I didn't put these pieces together. It took me a minute, which, you know, life is learning. But a lot of what I was consuming were sort of content creators and business coaches who are really focused on helping people scale and grow their business. And in my mind, I'm like, I want to grow my business. I'm trying to get new clients. Like this feels like, you know, the right information. And it wasn't until probably like consuming enough of that content, or, you know, or maybe even there might have even been a creator who sort of like mentioned something of like, what phase of business are you in? Which I didn't get to a creator that even spoke to that until like 6 months into trying, like doing everything according to what these content creators were talking about. When I was in a building phase, right? So it was brand new. It's my first year of business. I'm just trying to build my business. And that has a very different need and like level of focus and attention or approach than somebody who already has a foundation of their business and is trying to scale and grow it, right? And so it took me a while to really figure out, the reason why nothing seems to be working and I always feel like I'm failing is because I'm trying to apply strategies and tools and practices that are meant for a business that is 1 to 2 years ahead of where I'm currently at, right? Like so I need to actually shift my focus and shift my strategy and really think through, okay, like I got to go back to square one about starting. Like, how do you go from the ground to scaling and growing? Which also, side note, it is kind of there aren't a lot of content creators about like how to build your business. There's so much that I find that is mostly about scaling and growing. Like all of the like business coaches and like the coaches for coaches are really heavy on the like growing and scaling and not on the actual, like, how do you determine and assess that your business plan is viable, or how do you pivot, or like how do you experiment and test out different things in a way that's going to be manageable and sustainable as you're trying to build your business, to determine if what you're offering is of value or is something that's going to be viable long term, right? Like all of those different like sort of basic things. As somebody who's, you know, I didn't go to business school, I just have a certain skill set and I like being my own boss. So, you know what I mean? So it's like, you know, I'm sort of falling into it from a different place. And so there was a huge learning curve for me of like, how do you actually start a business, and, you know, thinking like a business owner versus a service provider who's always, you know, performed for others or sort of had like contracted to other businesses in ways that, you know, didn't feel like, you know, I didn't have to do a whole lot. Like they came to me and I, you know, performed the service. You know, that kind of a thing. So it was a really important lesson for me in being really aware of, like, where am I at? Like, what is the actual current like life cycle or phase that I am in personally and that my business is in, and how am I making sure that I'm addressing those needs and filtering out what, as good as the advice might be, because there's definitely like one content creator in particular who her information is great, and I know that it's for future Amanda and my future business, right? Because what she's talking to, or sort of the skills and approaches that she speaks to, are very much about scaling and growing. But some of the concepts that she talks about are helpful for me to think about now as I'm thinking of like, okay, long term, where do I think I'm headed, right? Or what do I want to build towards? But that's not the skill, like what she speaks to or the services that she offers don't address that, right? It's just a sort of point of like a benchmark to work towards.
Yeah.
Everything else, you know, like I can filter out, like either have that lens if I'm going to consume that type of content, or filter out all of the noise and the voices and the ideas and the advice that may or may not be good or valuable, or might be good or valuable to other people, but not to you or not to me, right? Because it's not where I'm at. So having some of that awareness of and recognizing how to filter out some of that noise was really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you're saying that. And I think for me, what brings to my mind is what I implemented is my CEO day. So like, I feel like as an entrepreneur, business owner, you need to have this like forward-looking, visionary, what's in the future? Where am I going? You totally need that. And I think it's this challenge of finding this balance of like, where am I at now? What is my day to day? Especially when you're a very small business solo entrepreneur, you have a lot of things that you've got to do. So what I experience often is either it's this like, there's no room for that forward-thinking, visionary CEO mindset, and it's very much, I'm just the doer, executor, surviving in the business kind of person. Or it's like what you described. It sounds very familiar to me as well, and resonates with me of like, oh, but I want to be so much further ahead, and I want to like, you know, already kind of like living in that future and feeling that it's not moving fast enough where you're right now. And I think it's just finding this balance. And for me personally, I really felt like creating that CEO day, which is always my Wednesday, because my kids finish school midday. So it's just a few hours really. But it's the day where I do that planning and visualizing and strategizing and that kind of thing. Yeah. And so I know that when I get a new idea, or I find a new creator, and I'm like, oh, this sounds cool, but I put it on my CEO day list of things to do. I don't do it on a Monday. It just hasn't got room on a Monday. So it's, you know, kind of like, compartmentalizing and finding these days of like, okay, my focus needs to be on X. I cannot afford to be distracted by someone who's telling me some really cool new strategy or tool. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it somewhere else where it's got its place so that it has some attention because it deserves that. But it's not interfering with the really important stuff that needs to get done and that moves the needle. So I think this is when I'm like, yeah, and on a practical side, having these days can really be helpful to do it that way.
I love that. I do something similar. I sort of set aside, like, Mondays and Fridays are days that I try not to schedule a lot of meetings, if any. And so, Mondays I'll usually use as my, like, sort of semi-meditative, more fluid, like, all right, I'm going to write, I'm going to get some stuff done. I'm just going to kind of like ease, like, sort of orient to the week and do some more of that, like, visualizing. That's sort of like how I like to start my week, is really trying to sort of set the mood, right? Set the tone and check in with myself. And then Friday is sort of more of like, it's a buffer where if there's anything that I haven't been able to finish during the week, it's like, it gives me a little bit more time or a little bit more flexibility to, like, put the finishing touches on something, or to make sure I've gotten everything done that I need to get done. And then it also allows me to sort of think through or reflect on, how did this week go? What do I really want or need to focus on next week, right? And so it's that sort of creating those spaces that allow you to do the things that either you would otherwise procrastinate or would have a hard time getting done between meetings and obligations and all of the other stuff that you have going on in your business, so that you can do, like what Anne, you're talking about, where you can sort of strategize or sort of really, like, plan, like, actually sit down and think through. I've been doing, like, all of the day-to-day tasks, I've been doing those. Today is not the day for day-to-day tasks. Today is the day for, like, at least monthly to yearly planning or quarterly planning to think through and check in with where things are at and make sure everything's, set. And that reflection time too, of, like, checking in with yourself to see, like, am I feeling really overwhelmed? Am I, like, where is the urgency? Am I getting distracted by shiny objects? Is the information or the content or the way that I'm spending my time, like, consuming things, whether that's in your leisure time or that the professional level sort of development kind of things, is this stuff that's actually, like, helping me? Like, is it providing that entertainment or that mental break that I need? Is it offering information that's actually of value? Or is it distracting and confusing me? Or is it creating more stress and anxiety because now I feel like I'm not where I want to be, or where I think I'm quote unquote supposed to be? Because this is the thing that I have to coach myself on, but is one of the most helpful perspectives, is, like, there is no timeline, right? You set your own pace, you set your own timeline. Like, the way the world works is not set in stone or entirely. There's so much uncertainty. And so whatever, like, if you're telling yourself that, like, I need to get my business to, multi 6 figures or to 7 figures within 2 years, that's a great goal and you can strive for, like, that's not wrong, but that's not, like, you don't have to. You're the one setting that goal. That could be a 5-year goal. That could be a 1-year goal. You know what I mean? Like, there's those goals are arbitrary, and they're things that you're setting for yourself. And if it helps you, if it's serving you, great, do it.
Yeah.
But if it's creating stress and anxiety, or if it feels like it's unrealistic, you get to change those goals. They're not set in stone. You're the only one setting that goal, right? Like, you or your team are the only ones who are sort of creating that kind of urgency or that kind of deadline, which means that you get to change it. So like, there's a lot of power and autonomy there. I think, sometimes, like, or at least for me, I'm the type of person where, like, if I'm like, I'm going to get this done by this date, and then if I've reached that date and I either haven't gotten it done, I suddenly feel like crap. Like, I feel really bad about myself. And it's like, well, honestly, like, nobody else knew that was the deadline. Nobody's paying attention to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Like, you are the only one who is bullying yourself because you didn't hit this particular deadline that maybe wasn't realistic, right? So, like,
exactly. Realistic, yeah.
Yeah. So having that self-compassion and giving yourself some of that grace of like, a goal is a goal, but it's not a failure if you don't meet it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not the end of the world. Again, the sky isn't going to fall. And being mindful of that. Like there might be certain things where like we need to make this, this income or like this sort of revenue in order to like pay our bills or to like actually survive. That's what I would prioritize in any given situation. Anything beyond that is nice, is extra, right?
Exactly.
Like it's what you're striving for, but it's not going to put you out or sort of, create a whole other level of stress if you don't attain it or if you need to shift it or transform it in some way.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's like the people that I would work with most often really they definitely have goals, big goals sometimes,
Yeah.
but I think they also realize that if you achieve that goal but you feel crap along the way, it's not really great because what you said, it's a marathon. We're in here in it for the long term. And if the journey feels really rubbish, yes, you're getting your financials met, but you don't feel great or you have no energy left to do anything fun with that money or whatever it is. What's the point even? So I always like build in this like the feeling side of things. How do I want to feel? I've started actually now to on my daily to-do list to put a word of like what's the feeling I want to achieve today and what do I need to do for that, like if I want to feel calm and I look at my to-do list and I feel very anxious, well, that's not the right task. Then something is not quite right, and that doesn't always work because there's external factors that deadlines and things that need to be delivered, and maybe there are not projects that make me feel especially calm. But then I look at the other things of the day and I'm like, okay, so how can I create calm today? What can I do to achieve that? Because I think it's incredibly important that we feel good along the way. And then with that, we hit our goal, maybe not as fast as, working 24/7, but in a much more, sustainable way. And that's the whole topic, isn't it? So
Exactly. No, I do the same thing. I have like, how do I want to feel today? Like, that's sort of like, that's a check. One of the check-in questions, like how do I want to feel today? What do I need to get? Like, what will make me feel accomplished or good about today if I get it? Like, what needs to get done for that to happen? And how do I want to have fun today? Like, those are like the three questions that like, the sort of daily check-in kind of simple questions that I will have for myself. Because I've very much reached this point of like, nothing matters, right? Nothing matters except what we decide what matters. And so anything that feels like I have to care about it because somebody else is telling me I have to care about it, I don't care about that anymore, right? Like if there's a goal or some sort of like level or status or whatever that used to feel important to me, one of the things that I've been doing is checking in with myself. Is like, why is that my goal, right? Why does that matter? If this is a revenue goal, or if this is what I'm chasing after in my business or in what I'm trying to build or create, why? Like what is that? How is that adding value to my life? And how is that adding value to I'm very much an impact oriented person. And so like, how is that adding value to my life? And how is that contributing to a better world? Right. Or like, how is it accomplishing that? And if the answer is, I don't know, or it's not, then it's trash. We're recycling it. Yeah. We don't need it. Yeah. We don't need it. And so, and this is the other thing that, in my reflection is I was realizing that so much of what I had been doing that wasn't working, where I was like sort of reaching that point of burnout or like just a like complete creative block in content development and creation it's like, I was chasing after like business success in this way, or according to the definition of what the conventional wisdom was telling me is what that was supposed to look like and what it would take to get there. And because I like realized that I basically had to come to this realization of that may be true, but that's actually not what I want, right? Like all I want are the resources to support the type of lifestyle that makes me feel good and allows me to do something that feels fulfilling and, you know, supportive of the world that I want to see. So that doesn't like, maybe that 6-figure, like there's no actual number attached to that, right? There's like, I don't need to be a multimillionaire to accomplish that. And so once I had that realization for myself, which feels like really sacrilegious within like the business entrepreneur community, right? Like, oh my God, you don't want to be like a multi 7-figure or 10-figure, you know, business success or entrepreneur. And it was like, I had to kind of realize that's just, no, I don't, that's not what motivates me, right? It would be nice. It would allow me to do the things that I want to do, but that's not the goal. So the goal is being able to do the things that I want to do. And the resources that it takes to be able to accomplish that can take many forms, can come from many places, and doesn't have to have a specific figure attached to it, right? Like, you know, there's certain specifics that are helpful and like then practical when you're operating your business and looking at all of the sort of day-to-day logistics. So like those are the numbers that, yes, I will pay attention to and be specific about. But generally speaking, is like there's no ceiling and there's no floor. You know, like it just is. And there's a movie from like the 1980s. I want to say it's the 1980s called Meatballs. And are you familiar with it?
I'm just thinking, but it's not the one with the cartoon where it rains meatballs or something. I'm probably
no. Yeah, I think it's got Bill Murray is one of the actors in it, and it's basically like it's like a camp movie. It's about summer camp, and you don't have to watch the movie. It's very, you know, it's a very US 1980s sort of like cult film kind of a thing. But there's a scene, and you can just Google it, like the Bill Murray's "It Just Doesn't Matter" speech.
Okay.
And so like that is something that I go back to often, or like it's like one of my pop culture sort of you know,
yeah,
because so like the general context around it is he's a camp counselor at the summer camp, and every year that camp has like a sort of tournament of activities and games against another camp. Their camp is sort of the like underdog, like middle class, like kids who like they don't have a lot of money or resources. They don't have all the fancy things. And then the camp that they're against is like where all of the rich people have. So they have all of the like top of the line stuff. And so they always feel like they are like, you know, they're doomed to lose. Like they're really down on their luck. And so Bill Murray gives this speech before one of the tournaments of like, are they better than us? Yeah. Do they have more stuff? Of course they do. Are we going to lose? Probably, but it doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. And so he goes, like, he basically gives this kind of like speech that's like, who cares, right? Like, who cares, like, if they're better than you? Who cares if we lose? Like, who cares? Like, that's not why we're doing this, right? And so it kind of, like, so it's like, it's a fun little speech if you're into it. But that's part of like, that's sort of like where, like, you know, one of how I kind of got to this point where it's like, it just doesn't matter. Like, it's okay if it doesn't matter. You don't have to want what everybody else wants, and you don't have to build the business that everybody else thinks that you should build. You just have to do what matters to you. And that's how it's going to become sustainable.
Love it so much. Exactly. Yeah, gonna check it out, but it's exactly that. It has to work for you, not the rest of the world. And that's what matters. Your happiness, your success in your own terms and your own definitions. So I love that so much. Cool. Well, Amanda, let's wrap it up. Maybe if you want to share where people can find you, what's the best place? Where do we hang out most?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at whoisamandajane. And you can also go to my website, www.whoisamandajane.com. And that's pretty much where you can find me these days.
Awesome.
I'm not super active. I'm still in my social media hiatus for the most part. So I'm also on TikTok at Who is Amanda Jane, so, and LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having that wonderful conversation with me. As always, I've really enjoyed it. So I hope we get another opportunity somehow at some point.
Yes.
And, yeah, thanks. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, it was such a pleasure.
All right, then. You take care, and bye for now. Bye.
Bye.